I'm Dr. Lisa Lamb, and I teach preaching as a visiting professor here at Fuller Seminary. I'm especially passionate about seeing preachers in the developing world resourced and encouraged and equipped to preach. I am going to be reflecting today on Deuteronomy. A lot of us can remember when our parents dropped us off for college, and then some of us are old enough that we remember dropping our own kids off for college, waving to them through teary eyes and trying hard not to nag. But the truth is, we worried if we were the parents. Will she forget the faith that we've worked so hard to form in her? Will he be drawn in by the crazy dorm scene all around him? One of the final rituals of the weekend is usually a trip to the bookstore to buy a sweatshirt or a T-shirt, a symbol of new identity and belonging to a new tribe. And at that point, the journey is complete. Moses in the book of Deuteronomy reminds me of those parents. Right at that moment where they're itching to get on with it and get into the promised land, Moses parks them and talks to them at length. He is filled with hopes, and yet clouds of worry are popping up on his horizon as well. And that's because he knows human hearts. This book is filled with striking insights into the human heart, into human nature, our tendencies toward pride when things are going well, our tendencies to grumbling and panicky fear when they're not going so well. And of course, the college student analogy breaks down that he's not sending off an individual, but he is in fact using every word here to form his listeners' unique identity as a community, building into them the values and the vision that will sustain them as they learn what it looks like on the ground to live as the deeply beloved people of God. It's been said that the first word of Torah is beginning, and the last word of Torah, the last word of Deuteronomy, is Israel. The trajectory from the beginning has been toward the formation of Israel as God's treasured family, and this book seeks to guide them in every aspect of that formation. It exhorts them to treat each other with honor and compassion and to treat immigrants in their midst with generous justice and hospitality. In Moses' understanding, that faithful obedience is fueled by memory. And so he exhorts them to regularly retell the stories and kindle the memories of how God has redeemed them and been faithful in covenant love to them. Shaped by that lively memory, they will extend grace to immigrants, to gleaners, to widows. And as they do so, they're promised abundant blessing. God wants his people to flourish. He wants it to go well for them. A much repeated phrase throughout the book, that it may go well with you. God makes some lavish promises actually of material blessing for them, but ultimately God wants it to be well with their souls. And as this book is a work of soul formation, it does not just spell out how to keep the rules, but it digs into the inner motivations and attitudes of the heart. I'd like to give an example of that from an exhortation to care for the poor in chapter 15, verses 7 through 11. Notice how he gets beyond the simple actions to the heart here. He says, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The seventh year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. No, give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-hearted towards your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. Notice here all the appeals, not just to give, but to give freely with a glad heart and with an imagination that is shaped by both memory and hope. Unfortunately, that very parental worry, which Moses has about the people as he's sending them off, with the threats that they're going to be facing from other nations and their alluring idols, and the threats of their own mulishly stubborn hearts, can cause parts of Deuteronomy to feel rather harsh to us today. Rules about who should be excluded from the assembly, who may be taken into slavery or sent away from a marriage or even stoned to death, can strike us as brutally exclusionary. It's important to remember that these laws and codes were embedded in the customs and similar codes of the surrounding nations, and to see that even within these laws, we find many glimpses of grace, like the provision of cities of refuge for certain criminals. And another challenge of reading Deuteronomy is that the sheer level of detail here can feel, well, a little dry. The context of these legal codes and dietary rules is just pretty distant from our own, and we can kind of wonder, why did they get so granular about some of these details? Most of us simply aren't dealing with what to do when we forget a sheaf in the field and then remember it. Do we go back for it or not? That's just not a question that keeps us up at night. But I encourage you to persevere through that specificity, because embedded in the details is this pervasive and immense vision of radical care for others. If the forgotten sheaf does come to mind and you're inclined to go back and get it, don't do it, Moses says. Leave it. Leave it for orphans, for aliens, he says in chapter 24. And I love how that specificity extends even to care for creation, as it instructs us how to care for mama birds whose nests have fallen out of trees in chapter 23. I love that. All of this practical wisdom is rooted in the promise that as we lean into generous justice and compassion, it will go well for us. We will live out of abundance and gift, and not out of scarcity. Moses highlights another theme that can seem distant for many of us, and that's the theme of battle. Many of us live in countries where that seems remote, though for some of us that actually is a current reality. It was a constant part of life for this fledgling nation. They faced threats from every side, and it never really let up. In the midst of that, they are exhorted not to fear, but instead to trust. They are promised that God will fight their battles for them. May we too be people who trust God to fight our battles for us. The last thing I love about this book is how much it guided Jesus, who lived as the embodiment of faithful Israel. He quoted from it often. In fact, when he was tempted in the wilderness, all three of his responses were grounded in the warnings and promises found in this book. The God of Deuteronomy is his teacher and his father. And Jesus knows the mercy at the heart of his Father, and so he can trust him and not turn to shortcuts. Like the people of Israel who were about to leave the wilderness, Jesus in the wilderness stood on the cusp of a new life, and he chose faithfulness. Like Moses, he too would suffer and intercede on behalf of his people as a true servant leader. May we do the same as we face wilderness seasons and alluring shortcuts on our own journeys, as we learn about the needs of immigrants, of orphans, and other vulnerable people in our midst. May we be generous in the ways described in this book, and may we see God fight our battles for us.